Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend some time with Orient Express by Greene. This book was originally published in 1932 in the UK under a different title. When it was published in the UK, my understanding is it was published as Stamboul Express. But then the following year, 1933, it was published in the US under this title, Orient Express. So I've had this on my reading radar for quite some time. For one, I love the Agatha Christie book, Murder on the Orient Express, which I think came out a couple of years after this one, in around 1934, I think. And there's just something romantic about this luxury train crossing Europe, the Orient Express, from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to Istanbul. And I've been curious about the author Graham Greene's writing for a while as well. But finally, a friend of mine actually gifted me this book shortly before Christmas, and I took that as a sign that it was time to go ahead and get this one read. So I did. So what it's about, first of all, it's not a murder mystery. Although, as the Agatha Christie book, although there is a murder in the book, but it's not a mystery as to a whodunit. It's probably obvious from the title that the book takes place largely on a train, but not entirely on a train. The Orient Express was, or might still exist, I'm not sure, but it was an express train that ran all the way from Ostend, Belgium, all the way to Istanbul, Turkey. And the story actually opens with some English passengers on the ferry from England to Ostend getting ready to board the train. At least, as I mentioned, part of the romance of this book, when I think of the Orient Express, I do think of luxury. Although some of the characters on the train are in first-class private cars, other characters are in second-class shared compartments, which they share with strangers. This book actually tells the story of a number of passengers who are all strangers as they board the train in different places along the route. Some start at Ostend and then others board in a couple of other stops, but all have different histories and motivations, and they're all on the way to Istanbul for different reasons. And in this confined space of the train, their lives become intertwined, and that's really the fun of reading this book. And I'll speak more about this confined space of the train here in a bit. I think here I'll describe briefly an idea of the general characters. I do want to be really careful, though, to not give away any spoilers. Part of the fun of this book was just exploring the different characters, who they were, how they came to be on the train, what their motivations were, why they were going to Istanbul, and then ultimately how they all became intertwined. That was the fun part of reading this book. So I am not going to give any of that away, anything that I think that would detract from a first-time reader's experience with this book. Just in general, the main characters of the book are, there's a struggling dancer / chorus girl with a heart condition. She seems to me the type of character that is has been sort of blown about by fate, and she just kind of tries to make the best situation out of wherever she finds herself. It's this first time that this character has ever left England. Then we have an anxious businessman. He tries to stay to himself mainly because he is Jewish and he has to kind of constantly suffer slights and being shunned and that type of thing. And so he tries to get in a compartment by himself and stay to himself, although it doesn't quite work out that way on this particular trip. He is a businessman in currents, and he is, like I said, anxious over some business matters that are going on that come to light during the course of the book. Then we have a very ambitious journalist. She seems to be a fairly successful journalist, but she's not as successful as she'd like to be. She wants to be able to provide a nice life for her companion that is traveling with her. And, as far as her motivations go, as to whether or not she actually loves this companion or not, I will leave that up to the reader. But there is a backstory there, and it just seems to me, though, that this character, she really does want to be loved in return. She wants to be loved, but I'm not sure she's going about it in the right way. She's the type of journalist that once she sniffs out a story, she's not going to let go of it, no matter who it hurts, whose life it wrecks. She's going to go forward. So the companion, I won't speak about her too much. She does become a fairly major character in the book. I'll let the reader determine their own thoughts around her motivations. There's also a kindly physician who's got a secret past. He's the kind of character who thinks of others really before himself. He suffers because of the suffering in the world, and he wants to do something to change that. And he seems like a very kind person, but he does have this very intense secret, which we discover through the course of the book. And then finally, a couple of others. We have a successful but yet false novelist. This novelist writes books where he really affects a Cockney accent, even though he doesn't have that background, because he thinks it helps his readers relate to him and to his books. So we have this kind of character, this novelist. And then finally, we have an escaping criminal, a criminal who is on the run, appears on the train. So like I mentioned, before all is said and done, all the lives of all these characters in the book have become intertwined with each other forever and in different ways. Their lives are then ultimately changed forever in different ways. So just some main thoughts and themes that I took away from reading this book. The first one is, the main theme I think about the book is fidelity. This kind of faithfulness. We see this, some characters have a fidelity to a cause or to a person or to an idea. Others seem to be more out for themselves. And then there's sort of a mixed bag of faithfulness and unfaithfulness going on among these characters. That is really the main theme that I took away from the book. And then this notion, though, the experience of reading the book is all about movement. The movement as the train is speeding across Europe, and the characters are looking out the window and they see the landscape go, whizzing by. The movement all seems to in their perspective to be from the, going on outside while they're still. There's a quote here that really sort of illustrates that I will read. But in the rushing, reverberating express, the noise was so regular that it was the equivalent of silence. Movement was so continuous that after a while the mind accepted it as stillness. Only outside the train was violence of action possible, and the train would contain him safely with his plan for 3 days. So from this character's perspective and the other character's perspective, the movement is all going on outside, and they're in a waiting, holding pattern inside the train and not moving. It seems the constant noise of the train once they become used to it, it becomes silent to them. So they seem like they're in a stillness, a still silentness. The movement of the train, once they become used to the movements, it feels like they're not at motion at all, but the outside world is what's in motion. But we, the reader, know otherwise, right? Because we see them interacting. We know what the interactions are becoming. So we see their lives in movement. And I think this happens to all of us quite a bit, actually, in our everyday experience, where we think a lot of times we look out the window and there's all this stuff going on in the world around us, and we feel like our life is sitting still. But in fact, our life is also in movement all the time, even though we don't really perceive it. But an outsider, if I guess was a reader watching our life story or reading our life story, would see that movement. And so to me, that's just interesting food for thought for the day there. I think I'll leave the chat here because I don't want to give away anything, as I mentioned, that would detract from a reader's experience with this. And it is, while it's not a murder mystery, it is a mystery of who these characters are, how they become intertwined, why they're going to Istanbul, and then ultimately what happens to them by the time they get to Istanbul and how they've all been changed. So I will leave the chat there. Orient Express by Greene. My next chat is going to be, let me call up the cover for it. It's going to be Malicroix by Henri Bosco. I have already finished this book, and I will have a chat on it coming up very soon. Until next time, take care.